Hi, my name is Christy Wissink, and I am a licensed independent mental health practitioner. And I'm just wanting to bring some resources through video, written word, journaling, and other practical tools that can help all of us as mental health professionals and in the people field to help prevent burnout and stay within our careers as people helper. This video is going to be a part of a 3-video series on how kind of our collective trauma that we've experienced through COVID-19 and that parallel processing that we've been doing with clients really has impacted us as clinicians and what we can do about it to deal with the fallout from COVID-19 and that collective stress and parallel processing that we're doing in our world today. So often within our work, clients may look at us as though we've got it all figured out, that somehow we've kind of reached this enlightened place where life struggles don't necessarily touch us anymore. And you and I both know that that's not true. And really, COVID-19 just truly brought that to the surface because we were all in it together. You know, we too are human. We climb our own steep paths, we stumble on rocky edges, kind of trudge through those muddy trails, just like our clients. We get tired, we grieve, we hope, we heal. And the pandemic reminded us of this in such a profound way. And it really stripped away the illusion that there's any perfect separation between our lives and theirs. So that's where this idea of parallel processing comes in. You know, normally parallel processing is within that supervisory relationship when the therapist kind of brings in an interaction that occurs between the therapist and client into the supervision setting and then enacts that same kind of pattern within the therapist, trainee, and the client's role. Or the trainee kind of takes that interactive pattern and supervision back into the therapy session as the therapist now enacting as the supervisor's role. So it's kind of that shared experience. But I want to kind of take that parallel processing to another level as COVID-19 really showed us that when we're walking similar and exact same paths as our clients, it can take a different toll. It's just that shared experience where the stories of our clients bring into the room echo our own in ways that are sometimes tender, sometimes heavy, and really even sometimes deeply connecting. So in this series, I kind of want to walk alongside you as we explore what parallel processing means in that sense for us and behavioral health providers in a post-COVID world. So we're going to kind of talk about understanding parallel processing, what it is, how it shows up in our work, and why it matters. The next video will kind of talk about the emotional load, the reality of shared trauma, and the very real risk of burnout. And then the third video will talk about building resilience, practical ways to kind of help care for others while caring for ourselves. And then alongside of that, there'll be some blogs and journaling prompts and other practical tips that hopefully you can take and integrate into your own healing practices as well as your own self-care throughout your journey as a practitioner. So kind of think about this series like pausing on the trail together, catching our breath, comparing notes about the climb, and just remembering that none of us are really hiking alone. I love that mountain imagery from ACT and that we are all just alongside our clients, maybe a little bit farther ahead or a little bit farther behind, pointing out pitfalls, pointing out things. We're all kind of learning and stumbling and growing together. So just kind of want to invite you to take a deep breath, just pause for a moment and close your eyes if it helps, and think back to those early days of the pandemic. What was it like for you, both personally, professionally? You know, if it feels safe to kind of remember some of that. Maybe remember some of that uncertainty of March 2020, watching the world change like almost overnight. Maybe you recall sitting at your desk, adjusting to telehealth platforms like I had to on a dime. You know, I had never used it before. Maybe you had never used it before, trying to reassure clients while kind of studying our own nervous systems. For many of us, it really felt like the ground shifting under our feet, giving way, earthquakes on that mountain path. And suddenly our clients sitting across from us in sessions were not describing this abstract crisis. We're living through the very same storm on the mountain together. That shared storm is that parallel processing that we had to and maybe continue to do in the climate that we're in with our clients. As mentioned before, traditionally parallel processing is kind of used to describe what happens in clinical supervision. The dynamics between therapist and client often replay themselves in that supervisory relationships. For instance, if a client is highly dependent, the therapist might unconsciously bring that same dependency into their supervision. That's kind of the classical definition, what we might call the textbook parallel processing. But after COVID-19, the scope of this concept really kind of widened dramatically. It's no longer confined to kind of that, I feel like it's no longer confined to that therapy supervision relationship. It's now describes kind of the very real ways our lives did and continue to do mirror the lives of our clients as providers. When clients talked about the anxiety of not knowing what tomorrow might hold, we weren't just nodding along empathetically. We were right there feeling it, that uncertainty in our bones, in our nervous system, in that dysregulation. When they shared about the loneliness, we too were kind of sitting in quiet homes, maybe disconnected from families, gatherings, places of worship, support networks. And when they expressed grief over milestones missed, graduations, funerals, weddings, we often had our own list of losses kind of echoing back in that room. Parallel processing then isn't just about kind of the clinical dynamics anymore. It's really that overlap of life itself. And it's really can be kind of a double-edged sword. This overlap creates a new level of intensity in our sessions, and it did, and maybe it continues to do so for some of you. And as if the walls that normally kind of separate our professional, personal self really became paper thin. And that thinning can be both a gift and a challenge. On one hand, that thinning of that wall creates maybe a more deepened authenticity. Clients kind of can sense when we understand, not just with our nodding and our ahas and our empathetic listening, but also with our hearts. And that authenticity can foster trust and safety, and clients maybe feel seen in such a unique way when we are going through that collective experience. But on the other hand, this shared experience really can weigh heavily and did weigh heavily on all of us. The risk that these thin walls may collapse entirely, leading to blurred boundaries, compassion fatigue, and even burnout. We've all had those moments when our emotions rise up in the middle of session, perhaps a client's story of loss triggered tears we thought maybe in us were tucked away, or our client's anger about restrictions mirrored frustrations that we were also carrying, and without awareness, those moments can pull us under, we become dysregulated, and that's where that increase of compassion fatigue greatly can impact the longevity of us in this career. And so now the challenge is this: how do we allow parallel processing to deepen our empathy, but also without it overwhelming us? One of the most powerful ways to understand this dynamic is through the mountain metaphor in acceptance and commitment therapy, ACT. And so I'd like you to picture this. A client stands at the base of a steep, rocky mountain, overwhelmed by the climb ahead. Before COVID, we might have seen ourselves as the guides, standing a little higher, pointing out trails, offering encouragement, showing them the way. But during and after COVID, it became clear we are also the climbers collectively. We're on our own mountains, sweating and climbing and stumbling, trying to catch our breath. But there was so much intersection of our paths with our clients. And we'd glance over and just see climbing side by side. And what a humbling truth that is, that we are not immune. We know that, but also it just magnified in such a great way due to the COVID-19 pandemic. We are just not the outside observers walking with our clients, but we truly are in the midst of it. And it reminds us that the goal isn't necessarily to avoid it, and we truly couldn't, or even reach the summit as quickly as possible, but the goal really is to truly climb mindfully. Notice the path under our feet, pause and rest when we need to, keep moving, even when it truly felt endless there for a little bit. And the unknown felt really scary for me as a clinician, but also I know my clients felt that as well. And for us as therapists, it also means accepting our own fatigue, stress, grief, and pretending that those things don't exist. I know sometimes it's easier for us to just tuck it away and show up in a way that potentially is harming our nervous system. Willing to carry our own backpacks while walking beside clients, carrying others, and committing to working through our backpacks too. Being mindful of the load, being mindful of how you can show up. So I'd like to invite you to kind of maybe pause again here and maybe even jot down a few notes, or think it through, jot down in your phones. How has your climate mirrored your clients, or maybe even currently with kind of the climate that we're in? Where have you maybe noticed overlaps in your struggles and theirs? And maybe if you have it, maybe slow down even a little bit and think through the clients that are on your caseload now. How has this shaped your empathy for better, or to truly be honest with ourselves, maybe for worse, if we truly were struggling to keep our nervous systems regulated and stay present with our clients with everything that was going on in the world. For example, did your experience of isolation help you connect with a client's sense of loneliness more deeply? Or did its sessions make you feel heavier and harder to carry? Did your financial worries parallel theirs, sparking deeper understanding, but also maybe stirring up your own anxiety in session? This reflective practice is not about judgment at all. It's about awareness, because once we become aware, we get to choose how to respond. And so understanding parallel processing in this post-COVID landscape, because it helps us to name the invisible forces shaping our work. When we acknowledge these forces, reduce shame, we can stop pretending that we can always remain untouched by our clients' struggles, because we are with them in there. Instead, we embrace the truth that sometimes their pain and our pain overlap, and that overlap, when held very mindfully, can truly become a bridge instead of that burden. And so research has shown that shared trauma and parallel processing can actually foster resilience when we approach it with openness. So as we all know, our wounds don't disqualify us from this work. They can actually help be part of our strength. In our next video, we'll dive a little bit more deeply into that emotional load and the risks, the weight of that shared trauma, and the very real cost that it can have on us as providers if we don't tend to it. But for today, I want to leave you with this encouragement. You are not climbing alone. Parallel processing is not just a challenge, but it's also a reminder of our shared humanity with us together as clinicians and people helpers, but also with our clients. And in that shared humanity lies our greatest potential for connection and healing. When our stories overlap with our clients, it's not a flaw. It's a reminder of our shared humanity. And we are all on that mountain. And even when the path feels steep, we don't climb alone. And we are all on that mountain, learning and stumbling and growing together. I hope this video provided a little bit of encouragement. I encourage you to check out the journaling section and maybe the blog and the other practical mindfulness activities that are on our website, and check out video number 2 as we kind of continue this exploration of parallel processing and the emotional load.